Good morning, world. I'm your host, Steve Rao of Pod TV, formerly IBM TV's World Edition. And on World Edition, we talk about innovation around the world, global affairs, and what we can do together as a nation and world to build back stronger and better. As we've been dealing with the pandemic the last few 14 months, and we're emerging from it in the United States, one of the great diseases we've been talking about is one where we don't have a vaccine or an immediate cure: systemic racism. And today is a historic day in the history of the United States. On May 31st, 1921, the Greenwood community, which was known as the Black Wall Street, a thriving, prosperous community of entrepreneurs, abundant with innovation, led by black leaders of our nation, was massacred. Hundreds dead, thousands injured, and Greenwood no longer existed. Throughout the course of history, at least as long as my lifetime, I've really never recalled anyone talking much about Greenwood in the history books. Well, today, President Joe Biden is addressing the Greenwood community. He's meeting survivors of this horrific 1921 incident, calling it one of the worst racial incidents in the history of our nation. All three survivors are 100 to 107 years old. And the president, during his remarks, is expected to talk about fair housing policies, more help for minority-owned businesses and entrepreneurs, $10 billion of a community revitalization fund. And he's also going to address the fact that his American Rescue Plan will also invest about $31 billion to help address systemic racism. Grants for entrepreneurs, and also revitalizing vacant spaces to have more opportunities for community services, for entrepreneurs who can have incubation and office spaces to grow jobs, and to revisit and rebuild communities in the United States like Greenwood. Much of Greenwood was destroyed when highways came through and completely came through these communities. And so that's why housing practices are so very important. The president's also expected to announce eliminating student debt for many minorities. I could go on, but as I close out this monologue, what I'd like to talk about today is why these conversations are happening today. Is it because the racism that we've seen with the incidents of George Floyd's death, hundreds of black men being killed and women being killed by police officers across this country, the hatred and bigotry that we're seeing openly on social media, the emergence of white supremacy groups, some of which were not really shown to the world as wrong by President Trump? Now, this, in many ways, I see as a good thing. President Biden and other leaders have clearly made one thing clear: silence is not enough. Pretending that it never happened is not enough. And today, President Biden, as he visits Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greenwood, is announcing this as a day of remembrance. As I've said always, there is no immediate vaccine or cure for systemic racism. It is not something we can diagnose on a medical exam. But perhaps these conversations and bringing out conversations that are uncomfortable are exactly the medication we need to get our country living out the creed of our founding fathers and our Constitution, which says that we are all created equal with unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yesterday, we remembered our great soldiers of our nation who fought for that freedom, who died for that freedom. I believe they died so all of us can be equal under the law and pursue the same dream, a dream of being an American in the country which should be an inspiration to millions around the world for justice. And that's my monologue for today. I'm now going to be joined by Mark Lee. We're going to talk about Greenwood, which I think is going to be a very interesting show for me, because I really, to be honest with you, I have not really known much about this community. And so I'm a bit concerned about um, what's going on. So, Mark, we're waiting for Mark. He was with me. Mark, are you there? There you are.
I'm here, and I've actually brought the boss with us. So the boss is here as well. So
Okay,
the
great.
boss is here
Well,
also. So
I'm here.
I wanted to spend today's show talking about the Greenwood massacre and other issues as well. We're going to talk about different things going on in the world from a foreign policy perspective. Very interesting developments with the future of Benjamin Netanyahu, the hardline prime minister of Israel. We may see him out of the prime minister's office very soon. Another shooting in Florida. There
mhm.
was one in California, beginning to lose count again. But today, this is a historic day in our nation where President Biden is visiting uh, the place in 1921, which was known as the Black Wall Street.
Yes, of
Now,
course.
I'm going to start with Mark, and here's my question to you. I I feel sort of embarrassed or ignorant or stupid that I've never really heard much about Greenwood. Now, I don't know whether it's because I got in my own kind of life and didn't really know about it, or was this not really openly talked about in our history books, or and should it have been?
It definitely should have been, and it was not covered as well as it should have been in that regards. But there have been movies made about it. There have definitely been cases of folks learning more about it in recent times. But a lot of times when folks think about terrorism on our own soil, of course we remember Pearl Harbor, and of course we remember other things that exist. But I believe it was almost a decade or so ago that the move bombings took place in Philadelphia, which some people were thinking that that was the first time that a bombing had happened in our neighborhoods and on our grounds. But no, it wasn't the first time. It was actually bombing of an entire neighborhood there in Greenwood. So our own law enforcement bombed a complete neighborhood, and that was Greenwood. And there were several Hayties and several Black Wall Streets, of course, as you know. Durham was one of them. There was other ones around the country, and a lot of those were destroyed by various forms of attacks. There have been movies made about one of those just down the road in Wilmington on Fire, which actually a good friend of mine, Larry Thomas, was involved in, and all of that. But it talked about how that neighborhood was also destroyed in the early part of the latter part of the 1800s, early part of the 1900s, and all of that. So definitely, these are some things that have happened in our history that should definitely be studied and should be known more about. And I do feel that a lot of times they are not known, and this is part of our history that we do need to be aware of. And Nick is a student of history and a student of economics as well. So one of the things that I can let him know is that sometimes it's not always an overt attack, because, like I said, sometimes it's something that is the whole destruction of lives, as it was in the case of the bombing there in Greenwood. But sometimes it's also the kind of destruction that can happen when you ram a highway down the middle of a productive neighborhood, which is kind of what they did right here in North Carolina. So that was the Black Wall Street that we had. So there might not have been a physical bombing, but if you ram a highway down the middle of a community, that's pretty much going to be a form of destruction as well. So that's another form of destruction that was going on, because these were some very vibrant neighborhoods, and it was in the age of segregation. And in the age of segregation, these communities had to develop themselves. So in a lot of ways, and you may find this interesting that I say this, but in a lot of ways, they were doing what the Indian community and some of the other communities that get praised now are doing, which means that they were developing an infrastructure within their community. So I know a lot of times when folks think about what is going on with Indian Americans that come here, they think about the fact that y'all develop like tight knit communities that are very tight knit, and that's actually what was going on in the African American community as well. So not saying that integration was a bad thing. It actually has done some great things and all of that. But there were some very strong neighborhoods that were black run and black controlled and all of that. And like any other governments, they had their bad sides and their good sides. But definitely, there were some strong kind of things in our communities, including those here in Durham. So I sometimes wish that we could have the business acumen of that time, would definitely be greater partners with our other neighbors and
So
allies and all of that.
Let me ask Nick a question, and then I want to get your perspective on it. But Mark, yeah,
And
thank
I'm
you
also
so
going to
much.
bring Sasha in as well because
Okay,
he's
great.
joined us also.
But I'm going to start with Nick Paladiva, and then we'll go to Sasha. Nick, why do you think we're talking about this more now? Is it because of the good that the incidents of George Floyd and other things have forced us to not be silent about it? And, why is it happening now?
Oh, yeah, you have a good point. Why is it happening now? I think a lot of it does have to do with the George Floyd phenomenon that's out there, and all of a sudden now we're retracing our steps into history, and you find things that you just don't believe exist that did exist, and Tulsa was just one of them. I did remember reading in a history book. It was like one line. That was it. There wasn't really a lot of
Yes, that's what
you
I'm.
know, there wasn't a lot of detail in exactly what happened. All we did know is that there was this big burning, and that was about it. But even as early as yesterday, we learned some new things. Okay, and Mark may have saw it was actually in Durham. Okay, you'll love this one. So in Durham, of all places, they created a memorial for World War One.
I did see that.
Yeah, did you see that? World War One people who died, right? Okay, which is normal what we did. But what they did, and this is the part I didn't know and existed even as of yesterday, they had all the white people on the front and they had the black people on the back. And this happened when? In 2021? Are you kidding me? But the monument was created apparently around 1921, about 100 years ago. Okay, when 100 years ago it was kind of like, well, that's how we did things 100 years ago. Now you fast forward 100 years later, you go, what is this? It's obviously a serious problem. But what got me wasn't the problem. The problem is it's 2021. Mark, why wasn't this taken care of in like 1964? Where is Durham? Hello? I mean, this has been going on for a long time, and I don't know the reason for that, but I just moved here a year ago, so I'm kind of fumbling my way around through the segregated bramble bush that exists here in North Carolina, or at least we used to call it the Old South.
That's right.
Even though this is the old North state, we still have a lot of the Old South that's here. And then you have the New South. And I'll give you an idea how bad this is in Old South, still here in North Carolina. This is a true story. So I was campaigning for a guy called Michael Bloomberg, okay, because I thought he'd be a good president, and he seemed to
Oh,
be a reasonable guy. So I was down in the rural South, literally, campaigning for Michael Bloomberg. A guy comes up with his shotgun in his truck. This happened in 2020. And he goes, you boys better move along here because this is Trump country. And I couldn't believe it. And this happened in 2020. Okay.
so
I mean, see, the problem, which he doesn't know because he's obviously an ignorant person from the South, is that could be considered an assault. We
True
didn't
that.
prosecute it. He could be arrested and he would spend time in the big house jail. But the person I was with didn't want to pursue it. I said, look, this is illegal what he did. He could come us to a truck and say, hey, this is Trump country, wish you guys would leave. That's okay. That's free speech. But what he can't do is what he did is bring his shotgun out and say, this is Trump country. You boys better move along. That's
right,
garbage,
that's
Steve. And that takes place in 2020. That's
yep.
like right now here, buddy. Okay. And it isn't right. It is illegal. And he should be in jail, but he isn't. He's still in some rural South place that we were, what do they call it when you walk door to door and you canvass? I guess that's what they call it.
Canvassing.
Okay,
Canvassing.
that's what I was doing. I was canvassing, maybe. I was
So
canvassing.
Sasha, it's thank you so much. We're real quickly before we get into some international affairs. We're talking about. I don't know whether you ever heard about this incident. It's President Biden's addressing the community today, Greenwood, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, an innovation entrepreneurial district for Black Americans, and there was a massacre and hundreds were killed, and it hasn't really been talked about much in American history. Maybe a line or two. Today, the president's addressing the community, meeting the three survivors. One of them is a lady named Viola Taylor, who's 107. She spoke at the U.S. Congress about a year ago about this. But basically, he's highlighting more minority-owned businesses, fair housing acts, looking at keeping highways from going through these communities. But what are your thoughts about? I mean, my question to the panel was: do you think George Floyd's death and these kinds of incidents in America have heightened the focus of it? Or, I mean,
Actually, I would like to say how I've underestimated the meaning of Floyd, what's his name, George Floyd death. I was the first one when I heard about it. I think I did it right here on this panel. I said, "What really happened? One criminal killed another criminal. What's the big deal about it?" Well, I underestimated the meaning of that. First of all, I underestimated that yes, one guy killed another guy. It's not a big deal, except that if it was captured by cameras and became viral, and now all the world talking about nothing, there are no problems in this world except death of George Floyd. So I've underestimated all this effect, and I have to admit it. Number one. Number two, the Greenwood. What's really happened
What's
there?
Greenwood?
What year was that when it happened?
1921.
It was 1921.
1921 and 21, and we will be commemorating this for what, next 500 years, 5,000 years, for how long? Like it did happen. You know what horrible things in history ever happened? You can't even imagine. If you think about Greenwood as a big deal, sorry, it's nothing. What, absolutely whatsoever nothing, because there were first of all, don't forget that there are so many atrocities happening right now that people even are not aware of it.
Good point.
By the way, speaking about destroying communities, which I've heard just a couple minutes ago, the best at that was the late Israeli general Ariel Sharon. His nickname was Bulldozer. He was not sending tanks on the territories that Israel acquired. No, he was sending bulldozers. And these bulldozers, they were just ravage. Everything, whatever existed there, was gone. Nothing. Zero. And from that point on, you can start to build something on it, something meaningful, something new, and so at the same time it's time to use innovations and to make really good, nice houses with electrical system, with all the amenities and so on. So in fact, it was I would call it a radical real estate improvement process.
Well, I think that you do raise a point that there are many atrocities that occur around the world. However, I will say that it is a hypocrisy for the United States, to say that when you read the Constitution, it says, we're all created equal with inalienable rights. And you had a government that was run at that time by Woodrow Wilson and other presidents, and the fact that something like that could happen in a republic and it just not be called out for what it is. I mean,
I think that what Sasha brings, the international perspective
of course, I
problems.
That,
okay, and so let's just bring out one of them, Stalingrad. Okay, talk about a city. Okay, now Stalingrad, and this took place not in 1921, but 1942.
Yes,
1,100,000 people died in the Battle of Stalingrad. 40,000 were just civilians that were slaughtered. Now, if you juxtapose Stalingrad with Greenwood, it's not even close. Greenwood was a drop in the bucket. 1921 problem. 1942 problem was Stalingrad, and that was a big one. And we don't even want to get to the Holocaust. How many people died in the Holocaust? It was huge, and that was not 1921. That was in the 1940s. So I appreciate the international perspective when it comes.
I appreciate what you're saying as well, but let me just tell you this way. What is one of the biggest problems, and I would add to both of you, we've actually talked about it in this show, and we've actually said that, race is a big issue, but we've also, the tied to race is the whole issue of the class divide, and there is definitely class divide. If you have, and there are probably there's a list of the historical Hayti Black Wall Street districts. If you have, let's say, roughly 20 of those scattered around the country, and there might have even been more than that. But if
Sure.
you had 20 of those scattered around the country, and they have set up basic economic powerhouses. These were economic powerhouses, and you basically find different ways to destroy those economic powerhouses. Having you basically already created and helped create that existing class divide, which also ties into the prison industrial complex because there are more people that are pushed into a life of crime and things along those lines. So while I respect what you're saying about World War One and World War Two and what was going on in Russia, and I'm not discarding that. I am saying that this was a systematic attack. It was not. It was a bombing in one place, a highway in another, but it was a systematic attack. And if it's a systematic attack, there is some massive disparities that we are still addressing. So I should ask, will we still be talking about 100 years from now? Yes, if we don't make changes into the causes of those systematic attacks.
Right, and I'm
very good,
yeah,
very good point.
and then I'm sure we will be talking about
years
it.
or 500. It
Yeah.
could be 100 years, and that's it. Maybe 150. But I want to make a point when you are talking
I
about
won't be talking about it 150 years from now. You can talk about it, Sasha.
Yeah.
I'm not going. You and Mark can have a
I want
conversation.
to mention something, Nick. When people are trying to compare certain things to Holocaust or even mention Holocaust, people are not aware really what they're talking about. I want to tell you something. I was in Israel, in Jerusalem. There is a memorial by the name Yad Vashem in memory of the 6 million people, and they uncovered most of that, if not all of it, all their names, biographies, when they were killed, or so on. The most impressive thing, what I still do remember, when you enter the memorial, there is a huge wall on which the map of Europe of 1939, and it shows how many Jews lived in each country. There were 400,000 in Germany.
Yeah.
There were 800,000 in Hungary. There were 2 million and a half in Russia, and yet 3 million in Poland and many other countries with less population. You're going through exposition, you see everything, and then when you're exiting the memorial, there is the same map of Europe and population of Jews in each country as of 1945. Hungary, 20,000, remember, 800,000?
Yeah.
Russia, half of it was 2.5, 1.25. There Germany down to 30,000. And yet Poland, 3 million, remember?
3 million Warsaw. Right.
At the end of the war, there were 6,000.
Whoa.
Wow. Now we are talking about, but still, even that is mind-boggling. But you see, the numbers are too big. You can't comprehend 5 million, 6 million, 2 million. They're just too large numbers. You can't really imagine what it is. But when I was in Amsterdam, there is a museum of Anne Frank and house where she lived, all the memorabilia. Okay, you are going through all that, and at the very top, at the end of the exposition, there is a schedule of trains coming from Amsterdam to Auschwitz, Treblinka, and other destinations, and date and number of Jews in each train. It could be 2048 or 1575. Real numbers of real people and dates when the train departure from Amsterdam. Now that becomes real because you can comprehend there are so many cars in a train and there are so many people in each car, and now you're giving numbers, you're giving dates. So now you know that, oh my God, that's for real. That's probably really happened. So all the Holocaust deniers and all these idiots, they just have to go through two exhibitions. One is Yad Vashem, and one is the Museum of Anne Frank, to see how real what it was. It was not imaginary numbers, or it never happened like some people believe, or so on. It is really happened.
Yes, it really happened. And I think that,
No, there's no doubt that it really happened, but and definitely agree that it really happened, but there have been other Holocausts that have been vastly underreported. You were talking about the amount of people that were killed there in, around Germany and Poland and all of that. There are some estimates, and I do have some of this blood coursing through my veins as well. There were multiple millions of people killed over several hundred years that were what people would consider Native American population. So definitely, and there's a museum in DC for the Native American population, but except for the fact that there was this great out picnic that was going on for Thanksgiving and everything. Nick, how much Indian history did you get in your history books, and you also, Steve, that was actually about what was going on during that time frame?
Are you talking about Native American Indians, or are you talking about India Indians?
Native American Indians.
Oh, brother, very little. I mean, the thing is, come on, and even Indian Indians, next to nothing. Okay, the thing is, history was, or is, at least in the United States when I was growing up, was European history. Okay, and they called it European history and Western civilization. Anything outside of European history and Western civilization was, forget it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, it wasn't taught. I did take one course that was actually African history, but was basically about history in Africa by somebody who was actually from Africa. But the thing is, the amount of history that was there is much richer than what was taught. And you can just go to places like Timbuktu. Google what happened in Timbuktu. I mean, it was kind of amazing, the culture and actually frankly, the huge empires that they had in that region of Africa. But it's totally ignored in the United States. And if you go to India, there's a huge history there, which is totally ignored here even today. I mean, the thing is, I have to dig and research it because I can't go to a channel like Rick Steves Europe is on PBS, the Poor Boy station, all the time. You never see Rick Steves India. Dude, come on. So we don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I mean, first of all, growing up, I never heard much about Native Americans or Indians, except, I'll give you an example. And I had a debate with my parents. I took a book in elementary school in West Virginia where I learned about the presidents, and there was Andrew Jackson. And all that you said about Andrew Jackson was that he was the first Democrat, the first president to be born in a log cabin, and that when he was president, he opened up the White House and had this reception and let everyone come in. It was really the party of equality. And never did I learn that he killed millions of Indians, reservations, that he treated people with such indignity. He was an absolute racist.
He dragged them all the way from North Carolina and Georgia into Oklahoma against the Supreme Court of the United States. And his answer was, well, they made their decision, now enforce it.
No, but this is a man who condoned beating people. And the fact is, he's revered as the great president, right? And so that wasn't conveyed in history books. Now, in terms of Indian American, when I was growing up, India in the 70s, especially in a state like West Virginia, really wasn't a well-known country. It was a developing country. It was there was no technology sector. So they would often, when I said I was from India, they would say, "Are you a Cherokee? Are you a Navajo?" My dad was a board-certified surgeon. Very, very fast guy, very young. He's still faster than all his sons, and he's 80 years old. Moves quicker than you would imagine, right? And they used to call him as a surgeon, curry in a hurry, because he was always going in between hospitals. And his greatest thing as a surgeon was his bedside manner, and he had great, great hands. But they just couldn't accept a surgeon of that caliber being Indian. And they go, "You're from India?" So I think that it happens over time, and I think eventually, now when you say India, more people know India, right? I mean, go ahead, Sasha.
The tragedy of native Indian people in United States of America, you have to understand really what's happened and compare it to other countries. You always have to compare something to something. So, for example, By the time of Ivan the Terrible, Russia was a relatively small country, at least geographically speaking, and he sent somebody by the name Yermak, who was a very close military man to him, and he went with despicable. It wasn't even an army; it was maybe a couple of hundred fighters or so on. So he went and he's acquired all Siberia up to next to Japan. He acquired all this without any warfare actions, without anything. And all these people who lived there, they were very agreeable. Actually, they were greeted him, and they become friends with many of them, and they learned language, and these people learned their language. And there were several different nationalities. They still live in Russia. I know some names, but it doesn't really matter. But see, they were living in a very rudimentary social systems. They had families, they had their relatives who lived together, so on. So they never. It doesn't matter whether it will be Ivan the Terrible who is in Moscow and it will be a so-called ruler of that land. They didn't care. They continued to live as they always did.
Yeah.
Now, the Indians in the United States, they were organized, they had their leaders, and their leaders, to protect their rights, their territory, as their leadership, they were organizing the poor people to fight the Englishmen or Spanish people in South America, or so on and on and on. And that was a tragedy. Because if they wouldn't resist and just say, okay, thank you, how are you? Okay, let's work together, let's live together, let's respect each other, they were fighting. And when you fight, the strong side wins, the weak side loses, with all the consequences. I'm sorry to say that.
So we're going to close out this issue on the Greenwood, but I want to end with some thoughts. I want to end on a positive note. And here's my positive note. I believe that the good news is that we have to look at policies in America to help address the communities that have been disenfranchised. So making investments in minority-owned businesses, addressing fair housing practices, having more affordable housing, reducing student debt, increasing educational opportunities. I think those are more important conversations for Black Americans, minority Americans, and all Americans, and just proclamations and resolutions and task forces that tell you that there's a problem. If you know there's a problem, how do you come up with solutions, right? And at the same time, if you're a white American watching this, we don't want to say that there are poor white Americans or poor white minority or other minorities out there, right? But at least the president is having a conversation about how to make it better. We may not agree on that, but it's more than just, I mean, being a city councilor, we read a lot of proclamations. We need a lot of resolutions. I mean, yeah, I'm happy that they're pronouncing this a day of remembrance in Tulsa, but I think it's good that the president is going beyond just making a day of remembrance and actually saying, now, is he going to get the support to do it with the Republicans in the Senate? That's a conversation maybe for another time. But anyway, that's my thought. I wanted to close out.
Before we go to another topic, I did have a quick question for Nick because it's a legal question. I was wondering his thoughts about this, which is, while I agree with what Sasha said, that, the strong is who wins, and that's, if you're going by any battles, whoever is strong wins, you get to control the narrative. But the Indians did do, and by the Indians this time, I mean Native Americans, did do something interesting from a legal standpoint. And correct me if I'm wrong, but don't most of the tribes actually have sovereignty and have their own laws, and that is actually recognized? So if I remember correctly, I think that most of the Native American tribes have their own recognized law, so they are actually a dependent nation within an existing nation.
Yeah, that's basically correct. There's actually a whole group of attorneys that specialize in the nations, because that's what they're called. Like they have the Navajo Nation, they'll have the Tillamook Nation. They got all these different nations inside, but they've also have been very creative with their legal thinking. Because they're a sovereign nation, they're allowed to actually have gambling if they decide on it, just like the state of Nevada has gambling. So here's what they do. You'll love this, Mark. Okay, so how do they get gambling into, let's say, Sanford, North Carolina?
Right.
The nations buy a piece of property. So now it's owned by the Cherokee Nation. And then what they do is they contract to put up a casino there, and they put a casino in your backyard. I'm serious. And that's the reason you see all these casinos dotted around the United States. They're actually owned by the one of the tribes. Now, theoretically, the money goes to the tribes. They distribute to their people. Okay, but you and I know how the money goes. Corruption always overtakes sensibilities. So a lot of the money goes to the tribe, heads of the tribe who control it, and then the people are still living in abject poverty.
Nick,
They call that corruption. Okay.
Nick, they should have put Trump in charge of this casino.
Remember, he was in the casino business. Okay, this is what got me, Sasha. He lent his name. He was in the casino business, Atlantic City, and he basically went bankrupt. My question to you, Sasha, how do you go bankrupt in a casino business? That's the easiest business in the world to run.
Nick,
I mean, you're taking a rake all the time off of people.
all you need is to have name Donald Trump. That's your ticket.
Stupid. I mean, the thing is, how could, if you think of the industries he went bankrupt in, okay, one of them was the airline industry. Now, oddly enough, I can see that. That's a tough industry. Capital, labor intensive, can go out of business at any time. The casino business. How do you go bankrupt in the casino business? You should be able to manage that properly. And then, of course, he had his Trump University. I mean, if you look at his series of failures, no one in their right mind would ever vote for him. Trump University, okay, which he couldn't have because he has no qualifications whatsoever to run a university. But people aren't in their right mind, and they go, well, I'll go vote for him because he believes in whatever he's going to say.
He believes in. We're not even sure what he believes in.
It's just like the guy down there. This is Trump country. This is Trump country.
But I actually ran into one of those as well. It was actually on my audio podcast, and she was so devoted to Trump that she said she's going to bring her rodeo girls, because she trains rodeo folks out there in, I believe it's Montana, and she was going to bring them on to do a whole debate with some of my folks that are more into Black Lives Matter. But this was back when she thought that Trump had won the election. How many times have I heard from Miss Lady since the election was determined? I think that would be zero.
Yeah,
before we toss it back to Steve, because I know he's got some world issues that he wants to talk about. Just to let you know, Sasha, I need to find out about Canadian law and how it relates to dual citizenship and things of that nature. So maybe offline we need to talk, because I've got a cousin who is involved in a company called Red Eye Supply, and I think he's actually based where you are, because I believe you're in Ontario. So we need to talk about that, because he's trying to figure out how to maintain his business with dual citizenship as he separates from his wife.
First of all, mention about the casino business in Canada, or at least in Ontario for sure. It's about the same thing. They have local Indian tribes who are buying the land and opening casinos, doing extremely well. They are smart enough not to hire Trump as an operator, so they're doing really well. And now, generally speaking, many laws, what you find in U.S., they are applicable to Canada to a large degree. There are very, very few laws that are absolutely contradictory to what you'll find in U.S. So in Canada, it used to be time when the system of Canada was perceived as a quasi-socialism system, or almost socialist system. So I remember once I was in the Caribbean, and I was buying some jewelry there, and the owner, because there are a lot of Canadians, I think it was San Martin. So the owner, when he was signing a receipt, and he asked me, "What country are you from?" And I said, "Canada." "Oh, a country of PST and GSP, because we had two different taxes. One is a federal tax and one is provincial tax." And that's all this guy knew what he was talking about. And then he said, "So I heard that Canada is the first ever third world country with the snow. I said, "Oh my God, what an insult!" but he had some reasons, of course, to say so.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. And the next big thing going on, and I hate to bring it up, but we got to talk about it. It's World Edition. The is this it for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Apparently, a deal is about to be made with Naftali Bennett, who will take over as the prime minister, and then Yair, I think Lepid. Let me get the name right. I keep blanking on the name. His name is Yair Lepid. I got it right. Who's more of a centrist? They would form a coalition government, and Netanyahu would be pushed out. A big victory for the liberal Democrats, I think, who really wanted Netanyahu out. Um, I'm going to start with somebody that's very passionate about this issue, Sasha. Is this a surprise to you that Netanyahu is so quickly being shown the door, and is this the end of an era in Israel?
Well, I think that people just get tired of him. I think he's definitely an extraordinary man. He was not always right, for sure. There are allegations that his wife, a former stewardess, that she's stolen a lot of money here and there. So it might all well be true, but I will tell you something about uh, the predecessor of Justin Trudeau in Canada was someone by the name Stephen Harper. He was a brilliant, just brilliant Prime Minister of Canada. He was there for 11 years, and there's no one can touch him, his predecessors or his followers like Trudeau. Nobody can touch him, but yet people just get tired of him. He
Yeah.
is there for 11 years. He's going to all the meetings. He's doing speeches. He's doing all that. And he's doing everything right, 100%. But people just get tired. But there is one country where people never get tired from its leader. It's Russia. Putin is there for now 27.
We love Putin.
Everybody loves Putin. He's a
He's
great
very popular over there. I mean, it's
he's
like
a great
80%.
thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out the history of Russia, not just as a country, but Russian stereotypes, the psychotype, and so on. Believe it or not, Russia is a Turkish country. I'm not talking about Turkey as a country. I'm talking about Turks as the
Ottomans.
The Ottoman Empire.
it's an aberrance of all kind of people. There is also some historians discussing the concept of Turan. Turan, it means that's a place when there are no country, no laws, nothing, and all they do, they're exporting all this terrible bandits who are going to all other countries, trying to control them, and but not to control, just to kill everybody there. It's a little bit different from
Yeah,
control.
I mean, it's
So-
well, you go ahead, Nick.
So all I wanted to say is that in this tradition of Turks conglomerate nations, including Mongols, Genghis Khan, they never had any other way for a ruler to exit as through his death. There were never elections. There were never so Russia as the basically continuation of this paradigm. They do exactly the same thing. People there ruling until their death. It doesn't matter whether it's tsars or communist general secretaries or even now. The only person who escaped others than death was Gorbachev. Because you know why? Because his country ceased to exist. He was a president, the first president of Russian Federation or Soviet Union, sorry. And one day in 1991, at the end of 1991, the country disappeared. There was no longer a country. So he's still a president, but without country. So he resigned.
Well, my last exam at Emory University was, just you made me think about the dissolution of a nation. It was a U.S. foreign policy class towards Soviet Union, and it was actually taught. I can't remember the name, but he served as a national security advisor to President Jimmy Carter in Russia. So a lot of these
Brzezinski.
I think so, yeah. And so he
Mhm.
comes in to the class and he says, the Union of Soviet Socialistic Republics no longer exists. The final examination has been canceled. And then he said, everybody's invited to my house for vodka and a party. And it was the best freaking time I ever had. And we were like, and the irony was, it was 1992. And guess who the next week was the speaker at our commencement? Mikhail Gorbachev.
Really?
Mikhail Gorbachev was the commencement speaker at Emory University.
He came to Atlanta. Gorbachev did.
Well, I heard, I don't know, Sasha. I heard he's like under not a witness protection program, but he can't live in Russia because of his life is in danger. So, isn't he even in America or somewhere? He's hiding, isn't he?
No. He's in Russia. He's well controlled. Therefore, he cannot even speak up his mind because there are consequences.
So he's quiet, which we don't hear from much.
Generally speaking, he is quiet. He's controlled by you know whom.
Yeah, he's not. We don't hear much about him, see much about him. Well, anyway, we'll go on to some other issues, but in terms of Israel, the question that I have is that if Netanyahu is forced out of power, does this actually help the whole two-state solution?
There is no two-state solution. I'm sorry to say so.
Do you think
No. It's the two-state solution was viable in 1948, in 1956, even 20 years later or so on. There were discussions, but how can you have two states if one state actually build up the modern society, the modern state, ready actually to invite all the Arabs who are willing to live in that state and get citizenship or so on. There are from my understand, 1 million Arabs legally, lawfully living in Israel, working and having a nice life. Now, what I want to say that the so-called Palestinians had empty promises of building something. They had a lot of opportunities if they wanted to. They could build a second state. But the problem is that it's not their goal. No. You know, two retired Israeli generals, they went to see the leader of Vietnam army who defeated the French army and then US army. And they asked him to give him a favor. How could you do that? How could you fight such a powerful armies and get them out of Vietnam? How could you do that? He said, yeah, it's an interesting question. A lot of people are asking me. In fact, before you, I had two Palestinian fighters who came asking me for advice, how we can expel Israelis from this land. You did it against France and America. How could we do that? He said, you won't be able to do that. You know why? Because French army, they went back to France. U.S. army, they went back to U.S. Israelis have nowhere to go. That's why we will never be able to expel them.
Then go to Warsaw.
By the way,
then go to Warsaw, right?
Yeah, Warsaw and everything. But I was actually going to mention another story that y'all may find interesting. I actually heard about it earlier today and everything. But, you know, speaking of what we've been talking about, which is some of the things that have to do with imperialism and colonialism and all of that. And by the way, if you build something in Palestine and you turn around and you bomb it, I don't know that it's going to be built. You could be cutting up a whole nother Greenwood to come back to our original story if we don't have peace in that area. But what I was going to say is that Macron, you know, the French president, he actually just recently went to visit Mali and some of the other African countries, and he was actually apologizing for their role in colonialism and things of that nature. So I'm sure this is all a political move to try to get themselves in good graces with the developing nations. And there are some nations that are definitely starting to flex some of their economic might as they grow and everything in Africa, like Ghana and some of the other ones. But I'm sure that was his reason for doing that. But he did go there recently. He's also threatened to pull troops out of Mali, but he was recently there and was basically apologizing for France's role in imperialism.
Yes, I mean colonialism, imperialism, all these things were occurring, all around the world, and so that is to Sasha Starr's point earlier in the show that these atrocities have occurred all over the world, where do you begin? But I think if we see things that happen in the past, we should talk about it, have a conversation. And my point was that in the United States, we're going to close out with Greenwood. But so Israel, oh yeah, this is probably for lawyers, Dan, but there are going to be some very, very busy month in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Mhm.
They're going to be talking about Obamacare, voting rights, the Arizona cases. This is a real test for Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Is she truly a conservative? There's been some skeptics that say that Kavanaugh is turning out to be a little bit more like a John Roberts, but that's all conversation for the big league lawyers on lawyers. Dan, I'd love to come back on a guest there every night, one of these days, Nick. But anyway, just food for thought. Going to be an interesting June for the U.S. Supreme Court.
Hey,
And also, abortion rights are going to be
abortion rights is going to be very big. Before we get ready to wrap it, I know we only got a few more minutes to go, Steve, and you want to wrap on a certain topic with Greenwood. I was going to mention just something very important. Today is June 1st, so we need to remember that this is the first day of Pride Month. So for those folks that fall into that LGBTQ community or are members of their ally group, which I consider myself to be an ally of those folks, definitely today is a day to honor their history. And by the way, Pride dates back to the riots at the Stonewall Inn in June of 1969. So that was sometime back and everything. And a lot of folks don't remember this, but it was actually led by a African-American transgender woman. So that is definitely going to be going on. A lot of celebrations dealing with rights of the folks with.
Where's the Stonewall Inn? Where's this located at?
Was it in New York City? New York
really?
City.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
back in 1969. And speaking of unusual news, and I know that our good friend Zach may be following this as well as one of our other co-owners, that being Kim, because I know that they're big fans of this. I think later on today or sometime this week, we're supposed to finally get that government report on unidentified aerial phenomenon. So that's supposed to be released sometime in the next day or two. So we're supposed to find out, according to the government, what all those mysterious things have been flying around and whether we actually think that there are things that are coming from other parts of the galaxy or whether they are military flights or whatever they are. But they are supposed to be releasing that, and they're saying it could be as early as today.
Yeah, the UFOs are real. There's just no question. There's unidentified flying objects, and they're aliens. They're looking at us all the time. And after their review, they go, these people are hopeless, and they usually take off, and they don't come back, Mark. So, I mean, that's been, I think, a tradition when they come in here and they scope around, they go, these people are really way backwards, and they just leave. And that's really what's going on. But we'll get the report. We'll find out.
We'll get the report. We'll find out. And, the other thing that I'm not a big fan of, definitely dealt with COVID and everything else. But there's this thing that happens every year that definitely could create some very disturbing things in terms of climate and all of that. And yes, today does mark the beginning of hurricane season. So, that's going to run through November 30th. So we can look at to the seeds for the next several months and see what kind of catastrophes they brew up for us as they create these storms and then they head into the various parts of the world. So definitely folks need to brace themselves and, get ready for the storms. I think the first one is supposed to be named Anna or something like that.
Yep.
The article I'm seeing is from Anna to Wanda. So looks like we're going to have those storms get ready to brew up and we'll see what they bring.
There will be hurricanes, Mark, and they're going to be struck down by lightning. The Tampa Bay lightning striking down the Carolina Hurricanes. But that's the way it is. They got one more game.
And they need to bounce back because they did not like that result of the first game.
1-0. That makes it really exciting. 1-0. Big one. I don't know. Hockey, I guess, is pretty exciting in Russia too because they have a lot of good hockey players. Sasha up and
especially goalies.
The goalies. Right.
Varlamov, Vasilevsky, Bobrovsky, and a few others. I mean, they're tremendous goalies.
Yeah, the NHL imports a lot of Russians. I think we import we import their vodka and their hockey players over here. So
sounds good.
They have good imports over here.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, the relationship will improve. So I have my Italian shirt on because I'm back to Italy. I haven't made flights to Moscow or St. Petersburg, but sooner or later, I'm hoping the relationships improve because I just don't want to end up in the bottom of a gulag somewhere.
No, we don't want you to do that, Nick.
Forgotten, you know.
No, we couldn't live without Nick P.O.D, whom
Yeah.
I've only met one time, but I tell you, he's much better.
Or I don't want to fly over Belarus and then George
Get shot down. Yeah,
the guy goes, "Hey, he's a dissident. He's on this TV show. He talked bad about Russia or Belarus or wherever the heck that is.
Wherever that is.
You're gonna come down here and spend 15 years in the Minsk gulag." No, I'm not interested in that.
Hey,
It really
Sasha,
doesn't go with my
Sasha,
lifestyle. You know?
Nick just said something that I'm very upset about in here, so I need to clarify this. Sasha, Nick just said that you're importing vodka, and I just looked at my refrigerator. I don't have any of this vodka yet, so why don't I have my import? I'm looking for this vodka from you, and you have not sent any because right now there's very little alcohol in my refrigerator, so you need to change that.
Yeah, he has Sasha.
Are you implying that vodka is not available in Durham?
Yeah,
Implying that good vodka is not available in Durham because you have the good vodka.
There we go, folks. There you have
For
it.
good vodka, you can try Grey Goose, and it will.
We're gonna close out. My last few remarks. We got a minute and a half left, but it's been a great conversation today. We've talked about Greenwood and the continued conversation of systemic racism. Lots of changes in the world as we look at Israel. Continued focus in the United States of America on the $6 trillion worth of investments when you rank the American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Act. Nick P.O.D, we're probably going to talk about what you think that might mean on the economy. But it's going to be very, very interesting.
$6 trillion?
$6 trillion.
Okay, we'll have to talk about it on Economics Monday next week,
we'll
too.
Sasha,
we are going to spend $6 trillion. That's more than the entire economy of Russia and all its satellites combined. We're just going to spend
Senator Richard Burr once
a lot of money.
But on one of these programs, when several months ago first was mentioned $1.9 trillion, and
yeah,
I
no,
asked,
we've upped it.
Trillions, but I asked for it as a joke. I couldn't believe
not a joke.
It will in fact happen.
$6 trillion is going to be spent next year. I mean, you just can't imagine the flood of money coming into the economy. You know, Germany did that too right after World War I, didn't they? How'd that go for them? Hyperinflation. Let's not talk about that.
Well, as I close out, I just wanted to say that yesterday was a very emotional day. But we also celebrated the greatness of America with the soldiers on Memorial Day. I happened to attend a lot of events, and I was able to meet, for the first time in a long time, an Indian American, this time not an immigrant like my in-laws, but a young man named Marlon Shah, who was the keynote speaker at the town of Cary's memorial. And it was quite interesting to see his perspective. He gave a great talk about the men and women he knew who died in battle, who died and what it meant to him. But I would actually encourage everybody to go to the PBS Memorial Day concert, which is still there. Very emotional event. And the most inspiring story to me was the rendition by actresses who played the family of Joseph Yatov, who was a National Guardsman who in 2001, as he was driving through New York City, saw his city in rubble. And he went to his wife and said, I can't see them do this to my America. He went in 2016, he went to Afghanistan, and in 2016, she got the military visiting her house that he had passed on. It was very moving to hear the words played by another actress of his daughter, the youngest daughter, who was only 6 when her father was deployed. And it was an everlasting reminder for all of us watching that these soldiers will never get their life back, their future back, and the people that they leave behind. But we should be grateful on that day that the freedom that we have is freedom that we all share. And I hope if you lost a loved one in battle or war or through sickness, we pray for you, because we know yesterday was a sad day. But as President Biden said, there may come a time when you can think of your family member like he does his son Bo, who died 5 years ago on Saturday, and a smile might wrinkle into your face somehow because they were heroes. That's my closing message today. I want to thank Mark Lee, Sasha Starr, Nick Paladiva, and all of you around the world watching. And we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of Pod TV World Edition. Thank you so much.